Welcome, everybody. Today we are going to start our discussion on the Roman army. And to do that, we're going to be using Rome Total War 2, which is a video game that has you command the Roman army. So first thing we are going to do before we get our battle started is we are going to look at how the Roman army was organized and why it was so effective. We're also going to be discussing why the Roman army, what life was like for the common soldier in the Roman army. So let's get going. So if you look at this large group, the army that we brought to the battlefield today, this group would be called a legion. Now, a legion is a group of roughly 6,000 men controlled by a general. Now, as you can imagine, before cell phones or walkie-talkies or radio, it would be very difficult for one man to give orders to everyone in this army. So, the Roman army split itself into smaller groups to communicate more effectively. The second smallest group, other than the legion, would be the cohort. Now, a cohort would be a group of maybe 4 of these squares, as you see them appear here. And this would be roughly 600 men, and they would have their own commander, right? Because it's much easier for one guy to command a group this large and tell them what they need to do during battle, especially when the general could not reach them. Smaller than the cohort would be the century. A century would be made up only of about 100 men, give or take. This is actually where we get the word century from today. Now it means 100 years. Back then it meant 100 men. And the century was commanded, again, by one guy called a centurion. So the centurion would command this smaller group of 100 men so they could survive, do what they needed to do, and so they could receive orders quicker. And actually, here is our centurion right here. He has the nicest hat. That's how you can tell it's him. So you can see that the Roman army prioritized organization above all else. It wasn't just about having big, strong soldiers. It was about being organized and knowing how to use them. Now, if we take a closer look at the individual Roman soldier, the average foot soldier, you'll notice that they are all armored, especially in their core, and they also have helmets. You'll also notice that they have very large shields, spears, and swords. Now, unlike most armies at the time, Romans were provided weapons by their government. They did not have to bring weapons from home. And this is really huge for the time. Now, let's start with the shields. Roman shields are very, very large. And what Romans would do with these shields is they would form a solid wall, which would be very hard for enemies to break through. And this wall would protect not just the one soldier holding it, but the soldier next to him and the soldiers behind him. The Roman soldier would also carry a short sword called a gladius, right? You'll notice it's really not that long of a sword, because this sword is not meant for swinging around in the air. It was meant to poke through the holes of the shield wall and really just stab the enemy soldier in front of them. So you gotta get a better view of the swords from this angle. Other than the gladius, these soldiers also carried a spear called a javelin, which you might have heard of. There's a lot of competitions where people will throw javelins in track and field. The Romans were a group of people that used this in warfare. This way they could throw weapons from approaching enemies who haven't quite reached them yet, and they could take a couple of them out before they reached the Roman line. So as you can see, each weapon, the equipment is not designed for one warrior to be super tough. It's designed for the Roman centuries and cohorts to work together, to function as one large machine almost. Now, other than foot soldiers, the Romans also had cavalry. Cavalry is a word for a soldier, a group of soldiers who fight on horseback. Which the Romans did do. Now, cavalry does actually provide a lot of advantages riding on horseback. One, horses are much faster than people. So, cavalry can get to places on the battlefield quicker, and they can also outrun their enemies. Also, horses are large animals. So a large group of horses with men on their back holding spears running at you and ramming into you and the soldiers next to you, it's going to have a pretty devastating effect. So the Romans used cavalry as well. Now, last week we talked a lot about Roman building and engineering. So let's move on to how they would use this on the battlefield as well. All right, so what we're looking at right now are catapults. The Romans would build and use catapults at war. Often, they would use these catapults to shoot large stones at city walls and break them down. But they did also use them on the battlefield because hurling giant rocks at your enemy is effective. So the Romans would build these. They would also build... excuse me. Large crossbows called ballistas, and now we're getting a look at those ballistas. These shoot basically a giant spear, or sometimes stones as well, at the enemies. You can kind of think of them as a giant slingshot almost. Now, Roman soldiers, people in the Roman military, were mostly citizens. We'll talk about what makes citizenship important more in class. But you've probably heard that word used today. You're an American citizen, which means you have a certain set of rights and protections, and the same thing existed in ancient Rome. But even though many of the people who were in the Roman army were citizens, this was not the case for everyone. Now, these men are called auxiliaries, which is a long, fancy word. An auxiliary is a person who wanted to become a citizen of Rome. So Rome made a deal with them. If you fight in the army for 10, 20 years and you survive, we will give you Roman citizenship. So that's why these men might dress a little different, look a little different than some of the other people we've seen so far, because they're not originally from Rome. They're from somewhere else and they want Roman citizenship. So they're fighting to get that, literally. This particular group are fighting with bows and arrows. All right, we're going to take a look at the opposing army now. Now, Rome went to war with everybody. Rome was always conquering more land. This army we're looking at today, who opposes the Romans, are from a tribe of people living in Gaul. We learned about Gaul. We marked it on our maps. And Gaul, back then, we call France today. Now, Gaul, or, this Gaulish army we're going to see is really quite different than the Romans, both in the way that they are organized and the way they're equipped. So if we take a close look, they look pretty typical at first glance, but you'll notice they have smaller shields and much bigger weapons. That's because the Gauls don't fight as a unit like the Romans do. Gaul believes that if you have strong warriors you will win the battle. So warriors, unlike Rome, where the weapons would be provided by their government, Gauls would bring their own weapons from home. If you were wealthy, you had nice weapons. If you were poor, you didn't. You'll see that some of these men have armor and some of them don't. And the reason for that is because it was up to them to bring these weapons onto the battlefield. So they're not organized into cohorts or legions. They're just strong warriors who brought their best weapons, their best armor that they can afford to the battlefield, and they believe that individually skilled warriors would be enough to win a battle, which in the past it had been, but not when you're fighting against a organized group. Think about it like football. If you have just the quarterback trying to make a touchdown every time, it might not always work. He has to pass to other people. They need to function as a group. And the Gauls just didn't really do that as much. They just depended on each other being strong. It's also important to remember that the Romans signed up to be soldiers, and they would stay in the army for years at a time, just like soldiers do in the army today. But in ancient Gaul, this was not the case. These men were not professional soldiers who signed up. These are just regular farmers, regular people. And it is only when their chief calls upon them to fight do they grab their weapons that they own and they go on the battlefield to fight. So these men are not training all the time or on campaign all the time. These guys are just regular people who are called up every now and then. So they do not have the same training or experience as the Roman army does. And right here, we're getting a closer look at some of those Gaulish warriors. You'll notice some are kind of going shirtless. Again, they don't have armor, so why not go shirtless? But you can imagine that's a big disadvantage when you're going up against an armored opponent. Taking a look, the Gauls do also have horsemen. They do have cavalry as well. But again, this is men who owned horses brought horses, men who didn't. The Romans, their cavalry, their horses would be provided. All right, there we go. All right, now the Gauls are going to go right into action. Again, strong warriors. They're just going to go in, they're going to kick some Roman butt, and they're going to go home back to their farms. All right? So they're just running right into it. Now, before the armies even clash, we're going to start to see the Roman war machines. You can already hear them working. They're going to start hurling rocks at the Gauls from a great distance. So they're already going to start losing men really before the battle started. We're going to look at some of these ballistas. You see them pulling back like a giant slingshot. And we'll see that. Looks like they're hauling a stone at the Gauls from a great distance. All right, and having a giant rock hurled at you has quite the effect. So the Gauls are already losing men. I think we're also going to get a look at the catapults. You kind of see how they work. Again, pieces of Roman engineering. Technology really makes the difference in many of these battles. And the Gauls are walking quite a long distance. You know, people ask sometimes why they weren't running the whole way. It's because it's a long way to run. You don't want to use up all your energy before you make contact with your opponent. Speed things up a little bit. Now, we notice some of the flags are white. In this game, that means that some people are getting nervous. They might retreat. And you kind of can see why, how devastating it is to have how some of these war machines could be.
We have discovered the enemy's hidden units.
All right, it looks like they're starting to charge. Now, in a minute, we're going to see how the shield wall worked. All right, we do have some men with slings here. But in a minute, we are going to see the Roman soldiers form their shield wall. Just a wall of shields and swords. And how it's going to be very hard for, no matter how big and tough they are, for the soldiers from Gaul to break through it. Alright, so it looks like they're charging. You'll notice they're really not organized that much into groups. It's just kind of a big clump of men. Meanwhile, the Romans, everyone has their place. Everyone has somewhere they need to be. And everyone has someone they need to take orders from. Alright, we're going to see the Romans throw their javelins in a minute. There we go. Now they're going to form their shield wall. And you'll notice, see how the Romans barely moved. Their wall is strong, and the Gauls can't break through it. All right, you got some soldiers staying back to throw javelins or shoot arrows. You have some running right up to the Romans. But the Romans, they threw their javelins at the start, then they formed the wall. Right? They're doing what they're ordered to do. They all work together. They don't just do what they feel like doing. We're moving some soldiers over here because they weren't really doing anything, so we're moving our wall over a little bit. But they're still in that wall. They're still with their century. We're seeing how the Roman army works.
Ammunition.
Right. Again, really pay attention. Look at the army from Gaul and look at the Roman army. See how the Roman army is in straight lines. Right? They move as a group. And you look at the Gaul army and you'll see how, you know, one person's deciding to run away, another person's deciding to stay and fight. One person's throwing a spear, another person is hacking and slashing at the Romans. But the Romans, the group stays, everyone stays. The group throws spears, everyone throws spears. Yep, it'll be over in just a sec, I think. So I hope that what you took away from this is that Roman technology was a huge advantage, Roman organization, and also the way the army was supplied. Everyone had the same kind of armor, more or less. They all had their shields. Meanwhile, in Gaul, they just kind of brought whatever they had. It's not about how strong an individual person is. It's about being organized. That's the secret to the Roman army's success. And at this point, the battle's pretty much over. Most of the Gaulish warriors are running away. That's about it. All right, well, I hope you enjoyed this. I know I did. It's kind of cool getting to play a video game at your job. And we will talk more in a moment.